What happens if the bank's appraisal comes in too low? We explain everything from how the appraisal rebuttal process works to how to prevent a low appraisal in the first place in the following video. I'm Nick at Hauseit. Visit our website, hauseit.com, to save money when buying or selling real estate here in New York City. So let's get started. If an appraisal comes in lower than the sale price, it means that the buyer's bank will only issue a mortgage based on the appraised value as opposed to the contract price itself. This results in a financing shortfall, which is also known as an appraisal gap for the buyer. Here's an example of what happens if the appraised value comes in below the contract price. Let's say the contract price is $800K and the appraisal comes in lower at $750K. The bank's loan-to-value ratio is 80%. The original loan size is the contract price of $800K times 80%, which is $640,000. The new loan size is the appraised value of $750K times 80%, which is $600K. The financing shortfall is $640,000 minus $600,000, which is $40,000. Because banks don't typically increase the loan-to-value ratio as a response to a low appraisal, it means that this financing shortfall must be covered through the buyer putting down an extra $40,000 on the purchase. If the buyer has an appraisal contingency or a minimum loan amount contingency, it means that she or he is entitled to cancel the contract in response to a low appraisal. However, most buyers and sellers will make an effort to keep the deal alive by utilizing any number of low appraisal response strategies, as we'll discuss momentarily. What are the next steps if an appraisal comes in too low? There are a number of strategies for responding to a low appraisal in New York City. We explain each approach in detail below. Option 1. Buyer increases his or her down payment. The easiest response to a low appraisal in New York City is for the buyer to increase her or his down payment to cover the appraisal gap. If the appraised value is extremely close to the contract price, most buyers should be amenable to putting slightly more down on the purchase. Now, if the appraised value comes in way lower than the purchase price, most buyers will be resistant to increasing the down payment. They might also be concerned that they're simply overpaying. If you are buying a co-op apartment, increasing the down payment will reduce your post-closing liquidity, and this will increase your risk of not meeting the co-op board's financial requirements. So that's always something to keep in mind. Option 2, seller lowers the contract price. The easiest way for the seller to solve a low appraisal is to agree to reduce the contract price to the appraised value. Most sellers will be resistant to this idea, however, especially if they feel that the appraisal is inaccurate and out of touch with the market. The most common approach is for the buyer and seller to renegotiate the contract price. One common proposal is for the buyer and seller to meet in the middle and set the new contract price as the midpoint between the appraised value and the original purchase price. Option 3. Buyer applies for a mortgage with a new bank. If the buyer and seller cannot agree on a new contract price, the easiest step is for the buyer to apply for a mortgage with another bank. Applying with a new bank means that another appraisal will be ordered. Oftentimes, buyers are resistant to applying with another bank since they will have to pay for another appraisal, which can run anywhere from $500 to $1,000. In addition, a buyer who has secured an attractive interest rate lock will be even less interested in applying with a new bank, presumably at a higher interest rate later down the line. Furthermore, applying with a new bank can often delay the co-op board approval and general deal closing timeline by 2 to 3 weeks or perhaps longer. Option 4. Buyer submits an appraisal rebuttal, also known as a reconsideration. Submitting an appraisal reconsideration with the buyer's lender is another way to respond to a low appraisal. Most appraisal challenges will only be seriously considered if there are factual errors in the appraisal or if the appraiser did not include the most relevant comparable transactions. How can I contest a low appraisal in New York City? A buyer can contest the low appraisal by submitting what's called an appraisal reconsideration with her or his lender. The appraisal appeal process typically takes around 2 weeks. The first step in an appraisal appeal is for the buyer, seller, listing agent, and the buyer's agent to thoroughly review the appraisal provided to you by the lender. When reviewing the appraisal, the most important things to look out for are factual errors and key comparable transaction omissions, like if the identical apartment downstairs sold last week and it wasn't mentioned. Most banks will only allow the buyer to contest the appraisal if there are factual errors in the appraisal or key omissions in the comps, as we've mentioned. Some examples of factual errors include incorrect square footages and inaccurate room and/or bedroom counts for the comparable properties. It typically takes around 2 weeks to hear back from the appraiser once the buyer has submitted the items for the challenge to her or his mortgage banker. When the appraisal challenge is complete, the appraisal firm will provide the buyer with what's called an appraisal reconsideration response, and this responds to each additional comparable or factual error presented by the buyer. If there is an increase in the appraised value, the bank will be able to lend against the new appraisal value. If there is no change in the appraisal value, the bank will not be able to increase the size of the loan. How can I prevent a low appraisal in the first place? Well, you can protect against the low appraisal as a seller by negotiating appraisal protection as part of your deal terms. The goal would be to get your buyer to waive the appraisal contingency, and this means that the buyer cannot back out or renegotiate the contract price if the appraisal comes in low. Keep in mind that a buyer who agrees to waive an appraisal contingency would still be able to include some form of a mortgage contingency if they're financing, but it would be narrower in scope since a low appraisal would no longer trigger an optional cancellation of the deal, as would be the case with a traditional mortgage contingency. You can also reduce the risk of a low appraisal as a seller by having your listing agent prepare comps to share with the appraiser at the time of the appointment. So there you have it. We hope you found this video helpful. I'm Nick at Hauseit. Check out our website, hauseit.com, to learn about ways to reduce your closing costs when buying or selling real estate here in New York City. And if you like this video, do us a favor, hit like, subscribe, leave us a comment. We greatly appreciate it, and we hope to see you on the next one.